What's up guys, and welcome back to another eBay Miniature Rescues Learn, Paint, Fail, and Repeat. Today we're going to work on part 2 of the Black Coach series that I've been doing. If you haven't seen that video, I will throw up the link right now. So we pretty much took care of the Black Coach in general, and now we're going to work on all of the ethereal parts of the model. So the horses, all of the ghosts, and anything underneath. Everything already had a base coat of black primer, so we're going to come in with some VALLEJO dark green and just give it kind of an all-over coat just to kind of start us off with a nice ethereal green color. On the horses in particular, I'm only using this dark green on any of the wispy parts, and then I'm trying to feather that from the legs up onto the body just a little bit, because we're going to end up putting a lot more paint on these horses and just covering a lot of this stuff up. Using white ink, I'm just going to put a few drops of this into a mostly empty pot in the airbrush, and that's going to give us a nice, lightish green color. It mixes really well with the ink, and then going over this pretty lightly onto that dark green is going to give us a little bit of a transition and start setting us up for when we get a more pure color, more pure green. And that way we kind of reduce speckling, and it gives us a nicer gradient overall. On the horses, I'm going to shoot from a mostly top-down position because we want to try and maintain a little bit of that shadowing in that dark green and some of the blacks that are still left over. And I'm going to feather this up onto the legs where there are any wispy things. And that's just going to set us up for a little bit better color shift later on when we start to put more colors on. As this color mixture runs out, I'm adding a little bit more white in and just trying to hit the ends of a lot of these robes on the ghosts. And then I'm going to go back onto some of the other things from the top again and just give a little more of a highlight so that we have even more color variation in these parts. Now, once again, we're going to let that white run out of the airbrush, and there's still going to be a little bit left, not too much, and I'm going to throw in some dark green ink. And this is going to mix a little bit and give a little bit lighter of a green color, so it's not quite dark green. And because it's an ink, we can go really lightly over the backs of these ghosts and on the horses and things like that, and it's going to mix really well with any of the highlights that we've done. So it gives a really nice transition without any speckling. Inks are very good for this. To the mixture of pretty much entirely dark green, we're going to add a few drops of black ink. Now you don't want to add too much to this because being dark green, it's already pretty dark, and this black goes a long way. But the idea behind this is that we want to really solidify the top of each one of these models. So the horses and the ghosts get the same kind of treatment. So it's a really nice gradient from dark to light at the bottom. The reason that I wanted to do this is because as these ghosts shift in and out of reality according to how the model works, they become corporeal. So they become more physical in nature. So the tops of them are kind of coming through into our world, where maybe the back end or, the wispy bits, as we're just going to keep calling them, are still in the other realm. I was planning on using a whole bunch of pigments again to kind of tie the horses in with the coach so they would kind of be similar. And I started off with this black pigment and it just wasn't working how I wanted it to. So I just wanted to show that, even though I've been using these things, it doesn't always work out how you expect it to. So I ended up coming back with some black ink and doing kind of the same thing. I wanted to cover that stuff up and then feather that back into the green so that it wasn't overpowering where, those horses have become physical creatures. So after covering those horses in black, I'm going to come in with some AK Interactive's streaking grime through an airbrush. And we're pretty much going to do a coat over all of the black on these horses and really saturate it with this enamel wash. Now the nice thing about shooting this through an airbrush is it sticks a lot more like an acrylic paint. It doesn't wash like a traditional wash would. So the idea behind this is that we want to build this up so that we can take some away. We can subtract some of this enamel wash away, reveal colors underneath, and get a little bit of a unique look to these horses. Waywatcher Green through an airbrush is going to act like a filter and tie a lot of our colors together on a lot of these ghostly parts. So it's going to tint that white a little bit toward that green, especially because we're going to be doing pretty light coats. I'm going to do probably 2 or 3 over the whole thing, let it dry, do another coat. It really builds the color up nicely. And like I said, it acts as a filter, and there's kind of this light green over everything that just makes those transitions and blends look a lot nicer. Coming back in with that white ink, I'm just going to touch up some of those parts that I really want to be, white, especially on the robes for these ghosts, because I want that transition to end with a really bright white. I'm also going to do a top down on a lot of the wispy bits, and that's just going to set us up for some other glazing in the future, because we're probably going to end up coming back with this Waywatcher Green to do the same thing and continue to brighten up some of those highlight areas. I also have to go back on the horses with the white to do, the same thing I was going to do anyways. But then I realized that I forgot to paint in the bones. So with the airbrush, I'm going over the top of anything that's bone. I'm not too concerned about overspray right now because I'm just going to have to go back over it with some AK Interactive streaking grime to cover those areas up. So it's not a huge deal. It's a little out of order, and I should have probably caught that sooner. The nice thing about messing up sometimes is that, other opportunities can present themselves in interesting ways. So I was gonna come back and airbrush this streaking grime on, and I thought, okay, well, this is an enamel wash, so why not just wash everything, but do it really, really heavily and right out of the pot? And this is gonna do a couple different things. First off, it's gonna cover all of that white, pretty much how I was going to anyways, but because it's a wash, it's also going to pool in interesting ways in a lot of these recesses. And when it dries, it leaves this awesome, nasty grime in all of those areas, and it looks really cool. So don't be afraid of the mistakes that you make while you're painting, because more often than not, you'll come out on the other side with a new technique that you didn't even know you could be doing because you decided to use something in a little bit different way to solve a problem. Now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to base coat a lot of the different parts on each one of these ghosts and anything that would be leather. Aged white for any parchment or banners. I think there's only one of each, so it's pretty limited. I decided to go with a nice copper color for a lot of our ghosts. I want to try and match what they've got going on with what the guy inside the coffin has going on. So, you know, in the case of the driver in particular, he's got that copper mask. Now bringing in some weathering pigments for real, I'm going to use the brown that comes in the standard VALLEJO kit, and I'm going to go over anything that's leather, and that's just going to give it a really matte finish, and it's going to change the look and texture of that to make it look a little bit more like leather instead of, you know, shiny, glossy plastic. For a little more metallic variation and to tie it in with the black coach, I'm going to use this black metal from VALLEJO to just pick out a few different details on some of these parts, and that way it just gives a little more variation, and it's using the same colors that are already on our black coach, so everything will fit together in the end. Because I like the way that this streaking grime worked out on the horses, I decided to go over all of the stuff in the same way, straight out of the pot, on all of the copper. And that's going to do a couple different things, and something really interesting that I didn't really realize at the time. So another super happy accident. So I'm putting all of this on, and it's giving a nice brown you know, all over coat and a wash to all of these things. I'm kind of spotting it on the leather just so it gives a little bit of variation in that pigment, because I haven't sprayed it with a varnish yet. But because this wash is an oil-based enamel and I'm putting it on really thick, it actually acts as kind of, I don't want to say a wet palette, but, you know, oil paints, essentially. And when I came back with some of the other colors, interesting things started to happen when they mixed with those oils. And we'll get to that in a minute. But for now, I'm throwing Waywatcher Green all over the Ethereal Wispy Bits and just tying those in again. After that Waywatcher Green was dry, I came back in with some mineral spirits and just started to wipe away some of the streaking grime from these bony areas. I also used it a little bit on where that green and brown meet on the body of these horses, and in doing so it wiped away a little bit of the color and kind of made for this really nice transition where you could see some of that darker green that we did way earlier underneath. So it just kind of made everything mix together nicely, and these horses just look, you know, undead and kind of disgusting, which is exactly what we were going for. Using Vallejo's Rust Wash, we're going to come into the parts on the horses in particular that are supposed to be steel. So these giant, you know, murder spikes on the top of their heads and the little buckles on their leather straps. And what we're going to do is just cover this very liberally and let that dry, and then we're going to come back in and stipple with some steel, much like we did in the first video. With Nihilec Oxide, we're just going to go very lightly across all of these ghosts and anywhere where we've just done copper, and we're going to lightly put this on. We don't want to overpower these models. There's already a lot of green in them, and much like the Black Coach, we don't want to take away from the other weathering that we've done by going overboard with this. So here's the part that I mentioned earlier about that heavy enamel wash over the top of this stuff. Now I wanted to make some streaks using this Nihilec Oxide, and what I found is that almost instantly it acted like you're trying to mix oil paints, where they blend incredibly smooth and nice. So I decided to kind of start going nuts and just figure out what was going on. And it worked ridiculously well. And I'm definitely, I don't know, I'm kind of more excited to see if I can incorporate some more oil paints into my painting just for those types of situations. With Cadian Flesh Tone, I'm just going to create a little bit of damage on some of this leather. So I'm going through and I'm stippling onto any of the edges on, you know, some of the straps on the horses. And on this whip in particular, I'm just making it a little bit heavier as it gets closer to the end to show that it's been, you know, well used. Time to get brave with some white ink through the airbrush. Now, we're going to put this in a few different spots on the coach and on the lanterns that are hanging off each side, and we're going to try and create that green OSL effect. Now, the reason we're using the white ink is because we want to set up a really bright color so that we can throw something over to tint that white a little bit later. And I mean, we're going to end up using that Waywatcher Green that we've been using the whole time to just tie everything together. But this is a really good way to set up any kind of glowing, you know, interesting effects with nice transitions. And you take an ink or a glaze, something that's fairly thinned down, and you put that over this white really lightly, and you're going to get that effect with pretty much any color. So using this Waywatcher green just straight out of the bottle, we're going to go right over the top of all of that white. And the more intense that you want this color, you want to do multiple coats. So you're going to want to let it dry and then do another one just really lightly and continue until you get the effect that you're looking for. For most of these, I only did between 2 and 3 coats. I didn't want it to be too heavy. You know, you want to still see some of that other color showing underneath. So we're mostly just tinting that white and making it this green. With Vallejo's white, I'm just going to edge highlight any of the areas on the coach where that green is the most intense. So the closer you are to the light source, the more of this you want to do. And the further you go away, that light is going to dissipate. So you don't want to have these super strong, reflections on any of those further away areas. So with these last few highlights, this is pretty much going to finish up the black coach. Now I gotta say, I had a lot of fun working on this, and from that video previous, I shared the story, and I gotta say that one of my favorite parts about making these videos each week is being able to interact with people who like the same things that I do, that like painting and enjoy, playing Warhammer or any other tabletop game, and just getting to know them a little bit and to share their unique experiences and what makes this hobby special to them. So thank you once again, Luis, for letting me paint this model for you and your wife. I really appreciate the support, and I hope you enjoy this model for a long time. And before I sign off and end this video, I just want to let you know that the next video in this series is going to focus on the Lord of Contagion out of the Warhammer 40,000 box set, the most recent one that came out with 8th edition, and a set of Death Guard Marines. So if that's something that interests you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can follow along and paint some awesome minis. Thank you once again for joining me on another eBay Miniature Rescues Learn, Paint, Fail, and Repeat. I am Casey, and I will see you in the next video.